Let's be honest. You've been there. The unanswered texts, the ghosting, that sickening silence where their voice used to be. And the worst part? They're enjoying it. They think ignoring you is power. They think it's some kind of twisted game they're winning. Like every second you spend wondering, waiting, questioning makes them more valuable. But here's the truth that no one talks about. Ignoring someone isn't a flex, it's a symptom of insecurity, of weakness, of emotional cowardice. Yet for so long, we've been told to chase, to fix, to prove. You've heard it all. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they didn't see your message. Don't give up too soon. But what if everything you've been told about silence is wrong? What if silence is not what weakens you, but what frees you? This is not another fluffy self-love video. This is your wake-up call, a reality check wrapped in fire. Because if you're done being the one who waits, who tries, who breaks themselves for breadcrumbs of attention, you're in the right place. Today, we're going to strip the lies bare and rebuild something powerful in their place. You're going to learn that the silence they use to control you will be the silence that transforms you. That's not poetic, that's stoic. Because stoicism isn't about being cold or passive, it's about reclaiming your inner control. When the world tries to steal it, it's about being unshakable in the face of games, manipulation, and emotional negligence. So if you're still wondering whether silence is the right move, I want you to sit with this one question. What if your silence isn't about them at all? What if it's your rebirth? Stay with me until the end, because by then you won't just be watching a video, you'll be standing in your power. And when we get to that final moment, when it all clicks, you're not going to be the same person who hit play. You're going to understand that in Stoic relationships, silence isn't revenge, it's revelation. Let's go. 1. The illusion of power in their silence. They think silence makes them powerful, don't they? As if every unread message, every minute you're left on scene, every cold shoulder is some brilliant strategy, some badge of superiority that elevates them above you. They sit back, smug and composed, acting as if their lack of communication is proof that they hold all the cards. But let's get real. What kind of strength relies on pretending you don't exist? What kind of confidence demands that another human twist themselves in knots for attention? The truth is, ignoring someone isn't dominance, it's avoidance, and it's far more revealing than they'd ever admit. You see, when someone chooses silence over honesty, ambiguity over clarity, detachment over connection, what they're really saying is, I'm not ready to face myself, let alone you. They're not holding power. They're hiding behind pretense, and yet because we've been conditioned to associate someone's distance with their importance, we fall for it. We think, they must be special. Why else would I be this? Affected by them. We equate mystery with value, silence with status, and so we chase. We start asking the wrong questions. What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? Why won't they respond? And every time we ask, we give them a little more control. Control they never earned, control they never deserved. Because at its core, Stoicism teaches us that power lies not in what others withhold, but in how we respond to it. So ask yourself, if their silence is so powerful, why do they need you to suffer for it to matter? Real power doesn't require pain. Real confidence doesn't need an audience. The person who can sit in silence without seeking control, that's the powerful one. But them, they're not sitting in silence to grow. They're sitting in silence to manipulate. It's an illusion, a fragile one, but it only works when you buy into it. Have you ever noticed how their silence doesn't exist in a vacuum? It's calculated, timed, always returning just when you start to forget. That message out of the blue, that hey stranger, that breadcrumb of effort that pulls you right back into the orbit you were trying to escape. They don't miss you. They miss your attention. They don't admire your strength. They fear losing your reaction, so they go silent. Not because they don't care, but because they don't care enough to treat you with respect. In Stoic Relationships, the silence that's rooted in growth and inner peace is noble, but silence rooted in fear, in manipulation, in the desperate need to maintain superiority, that's not power, it's panic in disguise. And the more you look at it from this lens, the more the illusion crumbles. Think about it. If they were really so high value, would they need to play games to feel wanted? Would they rely on absence to feel significant? Or would they show up with clarity, consistency, and courage? You already know the answer. Their silence doesn't make them powerful. It exposes just how much they rely on your confusion to feel relevant. They don't speak because they have nothing authentic to say. And somewhere deep down, they know that if they opened their mouth, the facade would shatter. The cold exterior, the "I don't care" mask, the image they've curated, it would all fall apart if they had to be honest. And honesty requires vulnerability. It requires integrity. It requires showing up fully, something they don't know how to do or maybe never intended to do in the first place. So instead, they sit back and play silent, thinking it makes them more desirable, more mysterious. But tell me, how can someone be mysterious when their pattern is this predictable? Every disappearing act, every emotional withdrawal, every dry response or vanishing text trail is part of a formula, one designed not to elevate them, but to destabilize you. And they've repeated it so many times with so many people that they've forgotten how hollow it truly is. They've convinced themselves they're untouchable, immune to consequences, because every time they go silent, someone, maybe even you, chases. And with every chase, the illusion is reinforced, but illusions don't last forever. And that's where your power begins, not when you try to break the silence, but when you stop fearing it. When you realize that their distance isn't a challenge to overcome, but a mirror reflecting their lack of substance. Because once you step back, once you stop reacting, you begin to see the cracks in the throne they built out of your validation. You see that their silence isn't gold, it's plastic. And it only shimmered because you gave it light. So here's the real question. Are you still going to romanticize their absence, or are you ready to see it for what it really is? Because Stoicism invites us to detach, not with bitterness, but with clarity. It doesn't ask us to be cold, it asks us to be conscious. To understand that when someone chooses silence as a weapon, they are no longer participating in a relationship. They are playing a role. And you're no longer in the audience. You're no longer waiting for the show to resume, because now you see, the stage was fake, the spotlight was never real, and the applause was coming only from your side. So if they think ignoring you is power, let them think it. Let them enjoy their imaginary kingdom, because when you rise in silence, in truth, in strength, you'll realize you were never beneath them. They were standing on borrowed ground made of your kindness, your energy, your time, and when you take it back, the throne they sit on, it disappears. This is the power of seeing through the illusion, not to get them back, not to win, but to walk away with your soul intact. In Stoic relationships, silence isn't used to manipulate others. It's used to discipline ourselves. It's the proof that we don't beg for closure. We don't cling to confusion. We don't perform for attention. We stand still and let the truth rise, because the silence that scares them the most is the one that doesn't ask for anything in return. It's the one that no longer feeds their fantasy. And once you've embraced that silence, once you've mastered it, you've already won a battle they didn't even know they were in. They thought ignoring you was fun. Wait until they feel what it's like to be irrelevant, not punished, not ghosted, just irrelevant. That, my friend, is the power they never saw coming. 2. The game they played. and how you fed it. They didn't start with silence, did they? No, they started with attention, charm, affection that felt like sunlight. They made you feel chosen, like you were the one they'd been waiting for all along. The way they looked at you, the way they listened. It was deliberate, intoxicating, and because it felt real in the beginning, you kept believing it must still be real, even when the signs started shifting. That's how the game starts. They get you hooked on the high of being seen, then slowly replace it with the ache of being ignored. Not all at once, that would be obvious. No, they're smarter than that. First, they take a little longer to reply, then the compliments disappear. Then they stop asking how your day was. Suddenly, it's you doing all the reaching, all the initiating, all the emotional heavy lifting, and you don't even realize what's happening. Not at first. Because you're still chasing the version of them they showed you in the beginning. You think, maybe they're just busy, or maybe I said something wrong. You start blaming yourself, adjusting yourself, shrinking yourself just to get back what you never should have lost. That's the trap. They want you to believe that the love you're starving for is just around the corner. If you're patient enough, if you're good enough, if you love them hard enough. But let me ask you something hard. How many times did you replay the conversations in your head, looking for what you did wrong? How often did you double text, then immediately regret it, only to check your phone every 5 minutes, hoping they'd reply anyway? How many nights did you lie awake, wondering what changed, while they slept peacefully, knowing you were still hooked? That's not love. That's control. It's a game. And the rules are simple. They win when you chase. They lose when you stop. The entire setup depends on your willingness to participate. And because you're emotionally invested, because you care deeply and love intensely, you don't realize that they're not emotionally invested. They're strategically detached. They show up just enough to keep you engaged, to keep you doubting, to keep you believing there's something to fight for. They say just enough to keep hope alive. But hope without reciprocation is a slow death, isn't it? You weren't wrong to believe in the connection, but you were misled into thinking your love was the key to fixing their emotional unavailability. You didn't fall in love. You were baited into codependency. That's why Stoicism matters now more than ever. Because when emotions get weaponized against you, only philosophy, only clarity can set you free. In Stoic Relationships, we learn not to chase illusions, no matter how familiar they feel. We learn to ask harder questions, like, if someone loved me, would I have to suffer to keep them close? If someone truly cared, would they communicate with absence or with presence? If they respected me, would I need to earn their attention through anxiety? These questions sting, but they're necessary. Because the game doesn't end when they ignore you. It ends when you finally see the pattern for what it is. They keep you on the hook, not with love, but with withdrawal. Every time they pull back, you try harder. You become the fixer, the pleaser. You think maybe if I change, they'll come back. Maybe if I'm more understanding, they'll soften. Maybe if I'm quiet enough, pretty enough, strong enough, they'll stop pulling away. But here's the cruelest part of the game. The more you give, the less they see you. Your love becomes background noise. Your presence becomes expected. Your energy becomes their playground. They pocket your effort like loose change, used, forgotten, unappreciated. They think they've earned your loyalty, not realizing they've only conditioned your pain. And through it all, you stay, not because you're weak, but because you believe in healing things, because you see the best in people, because you think love is worth fighting for. But love, real love, doesn't make you sacrifice your sanity. Real love doesn't punish you with silence or make you guess whether you're valued. Real love doesn't make you work overtime to earn basic decency. So ask yourself, why are you still giving to someone who's already stopped showing up? Why are you sacrificing your peace just to keep a seat at a table where you're served crumbs? That's not noble. That's self-abandonment. And if they've trained you to believe that silence is normal, that coldness is deserved, then it's time to wake up. Because the moment you recognize the game is the moment you take back your power, not by confronting them, not by giving a final speech, but by stepping off the board entirely. That's what Stoicism teaches us, to stop giving energy to those who waste it, to stop investing in those who gamble with our worth. And I know, it's hard to walk away from something you gave so much to, but hear me, what you gave was real. What they gave back wasn't. The real battle isn't getting them to see your value. It's remembering it yourself. And the longer you stay, the more you forget. But when you stop feeding their ego, when you go silent, not to punish, but to protect, you change the entire dynamic. Suddenly the game ends, and silence becomes your shield, not your prison. They thought you'd keep dancing. They thought you'd keep proving. They didn't expect you to stop playing. And when you do, they're left with their silence, not yours. So if you've been trapped in the loop, the waiting, the justifying, the hoping, let this be your turning point. Because they didn't win by ignoring you. There's only one if you kept chasing. You don't have to chase. You don't have to fix what was broken long before you showed up. You just have to remember who you were before they confused you, before they turned love into a guessing game, before they convinced you that silence was strength and that you were somehow losing because you wanted connection. Wanting connection isn't weakness. Manipulating someone's longing is. And when you see it for what it is, you'll stop trying to rewrite the story. You'll start writing your own. So if this part of the message is hitting deep, I want you to do one thing. Like this video and comment number 1 below if you're reclaiming your power, if you're done playing the game, and if you're ready to stand in the silence that belongs to you. And don't forget to subscribe, not just because this channel speaks to your heart, but because the woman you're becoming deserves to be fed with truth, not crumbs. 3. The turning point, you go silent. There's a moment that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with drama or fireworks. It comes quietly, often after nights of confusion, after you've cried in silence, after you've reread conversations and stared at your screen for hours waiting for nothing. It comes when you finally accept what your heart has known for a while, that they're not coming back with answers, not coming back with effort, not coming back at all. And instead of begging, something inside you stops, not out of defeat, but out of clarity. That's the moment you go silent. But this time, it's not the silence of pain or punishment. It's the silence of peace. It's the silence of no longer being willing to bleed for someone who wouldn't offer you a single bandage. And that silence, that decision to stop reaching, to stop explaining, to stop participating in your own neglect, becomes the loudest thing they've ever heard. You stop checking your phone. You stop watching their stories. You stop hoping for their crumbs. Not because you don't care anymore, but because you've started caring about yourself more. That's the shift. That's the turning point. When you begin protecting your energy the way you once protected their image, and suddenly the silence that once haunted you becomes your sanctuary. You're no longer a puppet waiting for the strings to move. You're no longer reacting to their every withdrawal. You've exited the stage, and what happens then? They notice, because your silence breaks the rhythm. Your silence creates discomfort, not just for them, but for you, because it forces you to sit in the truth. It forces them to confront what they no longer control, the addictiveness of your love, the reliability of your attention, the effort you gave so freely. It's gone. And when they reach for it and it's not there, when they throw out a breadcrumb and hear nothing back, when they expect a reaction and are met with calm stillness, that's when the panic sets in. Because now they're not sure. Now the game doesn't work. And the ego that fed on your need for them, it starts to starve. This isn't about playing hard to get. This isn't a tactic or a trick. This is about honoring your own boundaries, boundaries that should have existed long before they ever violated them. In Stoic relationships, silence isn't about manipulation, it's about detachment. Not emotionally cold, but emotionally disciplined. You're no longer in the loop. You're no longer fighting battles in your mind for someone who didn't even bring armor to the relationship. Your silence says, I've made peace with the unanswered questions. It says, I've decided to stop auditioning for a role I was never meant to play. And you begin to see that silence isn't empty, it's full of the words you won't waste, full of the dignity you reclaim, full of the strength you forgot you had. People often confuse silence with weakness, but silence held with intention. That's unshakable, because when you go quiet, they can't predict you, they can't decode you, they can't feed off you. They thought they were the storm, but now they're facing one they can't control, one that doesn't chase, one that doesn't beg, one that simply moves on. And that terrifies them more than any confrontation ever could, because they're used to noise. They're used to your voice filling the void, your reassurance fixing their ego, your presence validating their worth. But now, all they hear is the absence of what used to belong to them. And that absence, it echoes. It gets louder the more. They realize you're not pretending, you're not playing games, you're actually gone. It's not that you've stopped loving, it's that you've started loving yourself more. You're no longer performing in their theater. You've walked off stage and closed the curtain, and they don't know what to do with the silence you left behind. They keep checking to see if you'll return. They linger on your profile. They ask mutual friends. Maybe they even test the waters with a hey or a like. But you've seen behind the curtain now. You've seen that their silence wasn't deep. It was manipulative. You've seen that the pedestal you placed them on was made of your effort, your kindness, your belief in their potential, not anything they actually built. And that realization frees you. You start to redirect all the energy you spent trying to get their attention back into yourself. You begin sleeping again, eating again, laughing again. Not because everything is perfect, but because you're no longer making space for someone who made you feel like you were too much while giving you too little. And in that quiet, you start to hear your own voice again. Not the anxious, overthinking one, the calm, grounded, intuitive one. The voice that says, you deserved more. You still do. This is where your true power builds, not in getting revenge, not in making them jealous, but in no longer being available for the same pain twice. In Stoicism, this is where transformation begins, when you realize that external chaos can't touch you once you master your internal state. Their silence used to feel like rejection. Now it feels like a filter, removing those who can't meet you where you're going. You stop waiting for them to come back and say sorry. You stop needing them to give closure. You start realizing closure was never theirs to give. You were always the one with the answers. They were just the distraction. And when you go silent, when you make space for your own healing, they become exactly what they feared most: irrelevant. They thought they could ignore you forever, thought you'd always be there, thought they had you on a leash of hope and guilt. But hope can't survive in the absence of truth, and guilt fades when you realize you did everything you could. So now, instead of asking, will they come back, you start asking, why did I stay so long? Instead of wondering if they miss you, you start asking, what was I missing in myself that made their attention feel like a reward? Those are the questions that change you. Those are the questions that build a foundation no one can shake. You're not bitter, you're better. You're not silent out of rage, you're silent out of wisdom, because there's nothing left to say to someone who only listens when it serves them. And when the silence stretches on, when the texts stop, when the updates fade, you realize you don't miss them. You miss the version of yourself that believed they were worth all that effort. And now you're becoming someone stronger, Someone who doesn't chase ghosts, someone who doesn't confuse inconsistency with mystery, someone who stands tall in their own stillness. Because the storm they started, it didn't destroy you, it woke you up. And now your silence isn't just powerful, it's sacred. 4. Why silence scares them more than rejection. They can handle your anger. They can handle your tears. They can even handle your desperation. Because every outburst, every message, every emotional plea confirms one thing for them, that they still have power, that they still matter, that you're still playing the game. What they can't handle, what they never see coming, is your silence, your complete disengagement, your emotional non-response. That's what breaks their illusion. Because silence is not just a lack of noise, it's a lack of access. And when they can't access you, when they can't trigger a reaction, they're left staring at the thing they fear the most, their own insignificance. Rejection is something they've likely encountered before. They've learned how to spin it, how to manipulate it, how to wear it like armor and turn it into blame. But silence? Silence can't be manipulated. Silence forces them to sit with questions that have no comforting answers. Questions like, did I lose her? Is she done? Has she finally seen through me? And those questions haunt them, because for people who thrive on control, who feed on attention, your silence is more threatening than any insult or confrontation ever could be. When you stop responding, you stop providing oxygen to their fire. The drama collapses, the ego deflates, and suddenly they're no longer the one being chased. They're the one wondering if they underestimated you, wondering if you've moved on, wondering if they just lost something they never truly deserved. That fear, that uncertainty, that's the cost of their silence. It gets reflected back to them, multiplied, because your silence has weight, and they can feel it. They feel it in the stillness where your validation used to be, in the quiet where your reassurance once lived, in the space where you used to rescue them from their own emotional emptiness. And now they're alone with the truth they've avoided all along, that they don't hold the power, they were only borrowing yours. You see, silence doesn't just scare them because it's quiet. It scares them because it's ambiguous. They don't know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're planning. They can't read between the lines because there are no lines left. And ambiguity is something they can't tolerate because it flips the script. It makes them the one overthinking. It puts them in the waiting room. It makes them the one checking their phone, wondering why you haven't reached out, wondering what they did, wondering if they still have a chance. That's why silence is so powerful in Stoic relationships, because it removes the ego from the equation. It says, this isn't about you anymore. It says, I'm no longer making you the center of my emotional world. And that shift is terrifying for someone who only felt important when you were off balance. They don't fear losing you, they fear losing your reaction, because that's all they ever really had. And once you stop giving it, the mirror cracks. They see themselves not as confident, not as superior, but as someone who relied on your love to feel significant. And they won't admit it, but they know it. Deep down, they know they never earned the pedestal you built. They know they took and gave little in return. And your silence, your calm, deliberate absence, forces them to feel what they made you feel, confused, uncertain, unimportant. But unlike you, they don't have the emotional maturity to handle it. They don't know how to sit with discomfort. They don't know how to grow in solitude. They don't know how to confront their flaws. That's why they always return to noise, to chaos, to drama, to anything that gives them a sense of control again. But when you don't give it to them, when you stay still, grounded, silent, that's when the real storm begins. For them. Because now they're no longer sure if they have access to your energy, to your loyalty, to your forgiveness. And without those things, their mask slips, their confidence shrinks, and they start to realize the one thing they feared the most was never your anger, never your love. It was your indifference. The day you stop caring is the day they start falling apart. That's the paradox. They thought your attention was weakness. They thought your loyalty was desperation. They thought your love was leverage, but it was grace, and they squandered it. Now that it's gone, they finally feel the weight of what they took for granted. That weight is silence, and silence, when it lands in the hands of someone who abused, your voice becomes justice. You didn't need to scream, you didn't need revenge, you just needed to stop showing up for someone who never truly showed up for you. That's what Stoicism teaches us, to stop negotiating our worth with people who profit from our insecurity, to stop performing worthiness and simply stand in it. No applause, no audience, just quiet knowing. That is what terrifies them, because it means they've lost the power to define how you see yourself. And when you define yourself without them, you become untouchable. So if your silence is scaring someone who used to play God with your emotions, let it. Let the silence do what your words never could. Let it echo, let it linger. Let it force them to meet themselves in the mirror. You're not punishing them. You're preserving you. You're not withholding love. You're protecting it. And that distinction, that's what separates the wounded from the wise. So if this message speaks to you, if you feel that shift happening in your life right now, where you're no longer reacting, no longer chasing, no longer doubting, then claim it. Like this video and comment number 1 to affirm your power. And subscribe if you're ready to keep rising, not for anyone else, but for the you that's finally learning to be whole in the quiet. 5. Rebuilding yourself in the quiet. There's a silence that feels like abandonment, and then there's a silence that feels like coming home. When the noise dies down, when the games end, when you finally stop checking your phone with that nervous flutter in your stomach, something unexpected begins. At first, it feels like emptiness, not because you miss them, but because you've been living for so long in reaction to them. Your days were shaped around their responses, your confidence tied to their attention, your peace held hostage by their unpredictability. But now all of that is gone, and what remains is unfamiliar. It's just you, raw, unfiltered, without the chaos that once filled every emotional gap. And this is where the real work begins, rebuilding yourself in. The quiet isn't about productivity. It's not about posting glow-ups or writing grand declarations. It's subtle, it's slow, it's sacred. It starts when you look in the mirror and no longer search for validation in someone else's reflection. It deepens when you start eating meals without staring at your phone, wondering if they'll text. It grows when you sleep through the night without waiting for a sound that never comes. At first, these moments feel small, maybe even insignificant. But they are not. These are the bricks of your foundation. This is what healing actually looks like. It's not glamorous, it's not loud, it's not always Instagrammable, but it's real, and it's yours. In Stoic relationships, healing isn't driven by the desire to prove them wrong. It's driven by the desire to finally live right, with integrity, with presence, with dignity. You begin to rediscover parts of yourself that you had to hide or suppress to keep the peace. You start asking yourself different questions. Not why did they leave, but why did I stay when I was shrinking? Not how do I make them miss me, but what do I need to feel whole again, with or without them? That's the shift. That's the real transformation. You realize your life wasn't meant to orbit someone else's attention span. Your worth wasn't meant to fluctuate with someone else's moods. You were not created to be an emotional placeholder, a fallback option, a temporary thrill in someone else's story. You were meant to be the author of your own. And now, in the quiet, you begin to pick up the pen again. You start building a life that doesn't depend on whether or not they come back. You stop treating healing like a performance. You stop explaining your decisions to people who only listen to respond. You stop replaying conversations that ended long before they actually stopped talking. You stop begging the past to justify your pain. Instead, you start taking ownership, not of what happened to you, but of what you choose next. And what you choose now in the quiet says more about you than anything you ever said to them. You choose peace over proving a point. You choose stillness over chaos. You choose to pour love into yourself, not to attract them back, but to attract yourself back. The self you lost, the self you silenced, the self who once knew how to breathe without checking for permission. That's the part that matters. Now, because when you start rebuilding, you begin to see them clearly, not as the person you hoped they would be, but as the person they actually were. You no longer make excuses for their avoidance. You no longer glamorize the early days. You stop mistaking potential for reality. And in that truth, painful as it is, there is freedom. You see, healing isn't about forgetting them. It's about remembering you. The real you, the one who was buried under compromise, under confusion, under the weight of always trying to be enough for someone who didn't even know how to receive love. In the quiet, you learn that not everyone deserves access to your softness, that your compassion isn't a currency to be spent on the emotionally unavailable, that your loyalty isn't a leash. You learn boundaries, not as walls, but as sacred guidelines for your energy. You realize you're not too much, you were just offered too little, and now that you've stopped chasing, you begin to attract. Not because of some universe hack, but because you are finally aligned with your own worth. You're no longer a magnet for chaos. You no longer crave their validation because you've remembered how to validate yourself. And with that comes a kind of peace that scares people because it's unbothered, it's clear. It's not waiting for a response. It's not looking for closure. It is closure. That's what they don't expect. They expected you to collapse. They expected silence to break you, but it didn't. It built you. And now you're becoming the version of yourself you were always meant to be. Not because of their absence, but because of your presence. You no longer see silence as something to fear. You see it as something to use, to recalibrate, to refocus, to reset. And as time moves forward, you don't move on in bitterness. You move forward in wholeness. You don't pretend it didn't hurt. You just don't let the pain lead you anymore. You walk into rooms without wondering if they'll be there. You live your life without shaping it around the ghost of someone who chose to disappear. Because when you rebuild yourself in the quiet, you don't just heal, you evolve. You don't just survive, you rise. And what you create from this space is unshakable. It's not built on their approval. It's built on truth, your truth. The kind of truth that doesn't need to be explained, defended, or proven. It just is. And in Stoicism, that's the most powerful place to be. In full acceptance of what is, unafraid of what was, and no longer dependent on what might be. Because you've already returned to yourself. You've already come home. 6. When they come back, the test of your growth. They always come back, don't they? Maybe not all of them, but the ones who thought you'd never walk away. They come crawling back when the silence stretches longer than expected. When the attention fades, when the energy you used to give so freely no longer finds its way to them. They come back, some with apologies, some with nostalgia, some with cleverly disguised messages that test the waters. Hey, stranger, I was thinking about you. Remember when we... It never starts with depth, because they never learned how to show up fully in the first place. But suddenly, your absence has become louder than your presence ever was. And now they're wondering, what happened? Why did she stop? Has she moved on? They feel the shift, and it shakes them. But here's the truth you need to hold close. Them coming back is not the reward. It is not the prize. It is not the sign that your silence worked. It is the test. A test of everything you've rebuilt in the quiet. A test of whether you've been healing or just waiting. A test of whether you've been growing or just hoping. Because the moment they return, they will try to trigger the old version of you. The version that answered right away, that forgave without question, that twisted herself into emotional origami just to keep the peace. They are not counting on meeting the you who no longer lives in reaction, the you who now holds space, not for their games, but for your own boundaries, the you who is no longer hungry for crumbs. And this is where Stoicism becomes not just a philosophy, but a lived truth. Because when you've truly detached, when you've truly learned that your value is not defined by their absence or their return, their reappearance is not a temptation. It's a reflection, a mirror that asks, are you still the woman who would shrink herself just to be chosen? Or are you the woman who no longer needs to be chosen to feel whole? That's the moment of truth, because they don't come back because they've changed. They come back because you have. And now they're hoping the old script still works. But you know better. You remember what it cost you. All those nights of wondering, all those moments of silence you tried to decode, all that energy you poured into someone who never learned how to hold it with care. They come back because they miss the way you made them feel, not because they suddenly learned how to make you feel safe, seen, and supported. And now you know the difference. So when they reappear, it's not about whether or not you let them back in. That's not the real decision. The real decision is whether you betray your own growth just to revisit a story that already told you how it ends. Because if they couldn't see your worth in your presence, they don't deserve access after your silence. You are not a convenience. You are not a memory to relive when their ego needs a boost. You are a human being, whole, alive, evolving. And you didn't do all this work just to fall back into patterns that broke you. You didn't go quiet just to be lured back by noise. You didn't rise from the pain just to kneel at the feet of the one who caused it. So if they come back, and they will, remember this. Their return is not about love. It's about access, and you control the door now. You don't owe them a response. You don't owe them a second chance. You don't even owe them closure. The version of you they hurt no longer lives here, and the version of you they're meeting now. She doesn't negotiate with inconsistency. She doesn't crave chaos. She doesn't confuse presence with pressure. She's not here to rescue or reform. She's here to protect the peace she bled to create. In Stoic relationships, we learn that love without clarity is not love. It's confusion. Affection without consistency is not romance. It's manipulation. Attention without accountability is not desire. It's control. And if their return doesn't come with growth, with ownership, with humility, then it's not a reunion. It's a relapse, and you're too far gone from that version of yourself to turn back now. You've seen the damage it did, you've counted the cost, and while you may still have love for them, you now love yourself more. You love yourself enough to walk away, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in truth. You don't wish them harm. You just wish yourself peace, and anything that threatens that peace, no matter how familiar, no matter how tempting, no longer belongs in your life. So if this moment ever comes, and it will, stay grounded. Don't lose yourself in the fantasy of who they could be. Remember who they were. Remember what it took for you to find stillness again. Because someone who truly changed doesn't need to convince you. You feel it in their energy, in their consistency, in their ability to take responsibility without defensiveness. And if none of that is there, then nothing has changed except you, and that is enough. So if you're facing that return, if you feel them circling again, remember, this is not your test of forgiveness. It's your test of alignment. Ask yourself, does this version of me still need what they're offering? Does their presence enhance my peace or disrupt it? Does their voice echo with truth or manipulation? Are they showing up with clarity or with need? And above all, do I feel safe, not just romantically, but emotionally, spiritually, mentally? Because if you have to guess, the answer is already there. If you feel smaller in their presence, it's not love. If you feel confused by their message, it's not growth. If your boundaries feel threatened, it's not worth it. Because you are not meant to live in a loop. You are not meant to keep learning the same lesson until it breaks you. You are meant to evolve. And that means letting go of what no longer serves the woman you are becoming. You didn't come this far to get pulled back. And if they truly care, they'll respect your boundaries. They'll understand your silence. They'll see your stillness as strength, not punishment. Because the ones who are meant for you won't need to be chased. They won't fear your silence. They'll respect it, and they'll match it with presence, not pressure. So if this part of your story is unfolding, and they've reached out and your heart is stirring with old emotions, pause, breathe, reflect. This is not about what they feel. This is about what you've found. You've found peace. You've found yourself. And you don't need to sacrifice that just to satisfy their ego. You don't need to answer that message. You don't need to open that door. Because your silence already said everything. And if they didn't listen then, they don't deserve to hear you now. So if this message resonates, if it's the reminder you needed, then like this video and comment number 1 below. Let it be your declaration that you are no longer the woman who accepts less than she deserves. And subscribe, not for the version of you who was waiting, but for the one who's finally living. This isn't the end of your story. This is the beginning of your empire. So here you are, on the other side of silence. Not the silence they used to control you, but the silence you now carry like a crown. This isn't about what they did or didn't say. It's not about whether they come back or stay gone. This is about the space you created when you stopped begging to be heard and started listening to yourself. Because now you've felt the power of stillness. You've stood in the storm and realized it didn't destroy you. It cleared the noise. It pulled back the curtain on everything false and exposed the truth. You were never powerless. You were never hard to love. You were never asking for too much. You were simply offering all of you to someone who only knew how to take. And now you know better. You know that your attention is sacred. Your energy is not to be spent on temporary people or borrowed intentions. You know that connection without consistency is not a blessing. It's a burden. And most of all, you've learned to be at peace without needing to be pursued. That's what Stoicism teaches us, not to stop feeling, but to stop leaking, to stop handing our peace to people who only value it when it's missing, to stop improving and start preserving, to walk in quiet confidence, knowing that nothing external can shake a woman who has rebuilt herself from the inside. And that's who you are now, not because of what they did, but because of what you chose in response. You didn't react, you reflected, you didn't collapse, you composed yourself. And in that quiet composition, you discovered your greatest strength, restraint, discipline, dignity. That's the real crown. And they never saw it coming because they were too busy waiting for noise. But the truth is, you didn't need to scream. You didn't need to rage. You just needed to go silent and let your peace speak for itself. So now you don't move with desperation. You move with direction. You don't engage out of loneliness. You engage out of alignment. You don't seek closure. You are the closure. And anyone who comes into your world from this moment forward, they'll have to meet you where you are, not where you were when you were still breaking yourself to be chosen. You've risen too far to lower your standards for another half-effort apology. You've learned too much to entertain another cycle disguised as a second chance. And no matter how the story ends, whether they fade for good or reappear with promises, you're no longer writing your worth based on their attention. You've turned the page. You're on a new chapter now, and this time the plot doesn't center around who stayed or left. It centers around who you became in the silence and who you'll continue to become. One still, powerful breath at a time. This is your path. Walk it without apology. Walk it without fear. And let your silence echo longer, deeper, and louder than any words ever could. You are not who they left behind. You are who rose in the quiet.